On this day, in 1948, approximately 200 trade unionists gathered outside the Trade Union building in Brisbane for a protest march to the morgue in Alice Street. For almost 6 weeks, railway workers had been on strike, demanding equitable wages, margins and penalty rates, and waterside workers had been blockading the wharves with similar demands. In response, the Queensland Premier Edward Hanlon declared a state of emergency on the 27th of February and enacted the Industrial Law Amendment Act on the 9th of March. The Act, as drafted, prevented picketing, marching and demonstrations and extended police powers to arrest strikers without warrant, including those who encouraged their activities. On the Act being implemented, a number of Queensland parliamentarians were quick to speak their minds, using language that, even by today's standards, were absolutely extraordinary in parliamentary circles. Thomas Aikens, the Hermit Park Labor member for Mundingborough, stated that if government continued on its present reactionary road, it would not be long before Labour and Politics Convention was opened by the singing of the Nazi Horst Wessel song, and it would not be long before the streets of Queensland echoed to the trump of armoured stormtroopers, and members of Parliament, when entering the chamber, had to click their heels, raise their hands and cry "Hail Hanlon." Fred Patterson, MLA for Bowen and the only communist parliamentarian in the history of the British Commonwealth, further referred to the new Act as the worst piece of strike-breaking, scab-hurting legislation ever introduced by any Labor government in Australia. Patterson pointed out that the Act gave police sergeants or higher officers power to order any person to remain confined in his home or even to remain confined in a particular room in his home. Such a provision, he said, is one that Hitler himself would have envied. However, despite the threats inherent in the new Act, it did little to quell the unrest between the railway and waterside workers and the government. Within days, pickets were organised at multiple sites across Brisbane in complete defiance of the Act and the attending police officers. Inspired in part by Fred Patterson, who had been unapologetically outspoken about the new legislation in Parliament, it came as no surprise when the first round of arrests were carried out and charges laid against 6 of the men on the picket line. Patterson, who was also a barrister by qualification, immediately stepped forward to offer legal representation to the arrested workers, in turn making himself an even larger target and liability for the now infuriated Queensland Premier. Minutes after the next peaceful march began on the 17th of March at the intersection of Edward and Ann Streets opposite Brisbane Central Station, the trade unionists were violently set upon by almost 300 baton-wielding plainclothes and uniformed police. Amongst those in the procession who were needlessly beaten and arrested was Fred Patterson. Patterson was on his way to court to officially defend some of the previously arrested workers when he stopped to take notes on the violent behaviour of police involved in breaking up the march. Whilst writing, Detective J.J. Mahoney spotted the picket-inspiring parliamentarian off to the side of the crowd and callously crept up behind Patterson before striking him forcefully across the head with his baton, rendering him unconscious. Patterson was rushed to hospital and was absent from Parliament for 3 months as a result of the head injury. The sorry events of St Patrick's Day 1948 sent shockwaves around Australia, with the trade unionist cause gaining national support. The embarrassing affair led to the abolition of the Industrial Law Amendment Act shortly after. However, the needless police brutality witnessed on the day was never officially addressed, despite Premier Hanlon being repeatedly questioned about whether Detective Mahoney would be charged with attempted murder or a similar charge for his assault on Fred Patterson. In response, Premier Hanlon consistently sidestepped the barrage, instead claiming that the protesters had attacked one another. Ironically, photos published in the Brisbane newspapers clearly showed detectives wielding batons and iron bars. However, nothing was ever done to bring the violent constabulary to justice, or, in turn for that matter, to quell the numerous rumours circulating that the Premier of Queensland had potentially ordered a hit on a standing Member of Parliament.